we've reached our final game in this theme of summoner action games. It's been interesting. There's some cool ideas, but enemies were either overtuned or not tuned enough to make the gameplay enjoyable. So it's been a lot of misses rather than hits because of that. But hey, we have ourselves one more game to check out. And yeah, it's been praised pretty highly from a lot of places over the years. We've been through this before, but let's see for ourselves. This is Combat Overview. Here we go over the general controls, the main mechanics, who or what we use them on, and then seeing how it all comes together. Our main and only weapon is this X baton. Cool thing is, it has 3 forms that we can freely swap between on the fly. Baton is for those quick swipes dealing consistent damage, and is a go-to when fighting those faster enemies. Blaster is great for long range fighting, especially those flying enemies for example. Gladius is basically a great sword, so it swings quite a bit slower, but to make up for it, deals big damage and is best to break an enemy's guard. So not only do they have their own specialties, but each have a standard combo, a held attack, and even delay route at any point during your base combo. But they also have their own directional attacks too, from a 360 spin to crowd control and a back forward assault attack to close the gap. So when compared to Chaos Legion, yeah, we've come a long way to get some moves for ourselves finally. Now something you'll notice when playing this for the first time, our attacks are placed on the triggers. Can be strange, but for this style of game, it makes a ton of sense. Because it's not just you on the field, we have our legions as well that we can control too. So instead of having to choose between moving or attacking, we can do both, since our thumbs don't need to jump between the sticks and face buttons to do stuff. The triggers for attacking lets us comfortably hold our gamepad and still have full control at the same time. It's a pretty smart control scheme. Onto defenses, we have a dodge, but there's quite a lot to say on this one. So the usual stuff, if you spam it, you have to deal with some lengthy end lag. Also, it doesn't cancel attacks mid-animation, so the game is very committal. But if timed right, we'll do a perfect dodge. Now here's where my issues with the game begin. Depending where you dodge, it'll have shorter iframes. If that sounds kinda dumb, well, join the club because it means our dodge is completely inconsistent. It'll feel that way anyways. So basically, if you dodge towards or even to the side, you'll most likely get clipped. It doesn't even matter if you're still in that dodge animation because it's just how things work here. Yeah, this dodge really irks me because instead of balancing our main defensive option on us needing to know its active frames, be aware of its distance, and of course take into account of its end lag, you know, how it's been for over 20 years. Instead, if I use my dodge to dodge an attack, I'll get hit for that. Just makes no sense why you would punish a player like that. Kingdom Hearts is also a committal game, but when you dodged or time your guard correctly, you'll be rewarded for it and will even get some iframes afterwards to let your counterattack actually come out. So again, really strange how they want everything to be committal so we don't mash, which I'm perfectly fine with. But they dropped the ball by not giving us consistent defensive options that reward smart decision making, to know when to attack and when to hold off just by paying attention to enemy tells. Instead, you'll be damned if you do, damned if you don't. The only way to use our dodge is to just roll away, I guess. But who wants to run away from a fight? Yeah, this roll is definitely not the best out there. Felt pretty similar to No More Heroes 3, and that's far from a compliment. Speaking of counter hits, after a perfect dodge we can follow up with our baton, but again we don't get iframes for it to be considered reliable. Kingdom Hearts will give us iframes like I said, but also Onimusha Warlords. It'll reward us for knowing enemy patterns and their timings by landing an Isen, which is pretty strict to do, but the player is rewarded heavily for their skill, but not here apparently. And want to know what else is weird? There's some enemy attacks that don't activate that slow-mo at all, even if you perfect dodge, specifically projectiles. If you dodge it, nothing happens. I have no idea why they'll design it this way. In Bayonetta, it will start witch time, same for Transformers Devastation, and even Korra will let you interact with projectiles with your defensive options. So I just don't know why it shouldn't work the same here. You would think Platinum will learn from the past instead of making some questionable changes to what's been established for years. But hey, we have dodge offsetting. That should make up for things, right? Now there's also perfect call. So if you summon your legion right as an attack is about to hit you, they'll jump in to do this counterattack. Now that little animation has iframes, but the counterattack doesn't. But luckily it'll do an okay job at stunning that one attacking enemy to hopefully get a follow-up in time. There's also a follow-up sync attack out of a perfect dodge, but again it's very inconsistent because only Beast and Arm have iframes with their follow-ups. The rest on the other hand do not. So it'll be up in the air whether or not you'll get your counterattack out even though you're playing well. I'm just as confused as you are. Again, imagine if Warlords didn't give you any iframes during an ESEN. It would make this high risk, high reward mechanic that rewards skillful play to nothing. It would have been meaningless like it is here. So yeah, don't even bother to try and learn this because it's not worth the hassle. Looking at the HUD, the blue bar on top is our health, and right underneath is our DT. But don't worry about it. You get this at the very end of the game, and it takes forever to build. So it's used pretty rarely and doesn't play much of a role during gameplay. And those hearts are your revives or continues. Use them all up and you have to start from the most recent battle. Not the beginning of the entire file, luckily. So yeah, think of it like DMC3's yellow mode in a way, but instead of having a stockpile of them to lean back on, the higher difficulties will either limit these or remove them entirely. Now the segmented circle beside us is our Legion's limiter gauge. It'll slowly drain while they're out and about, and to refill it, either land attacks with your X baton or dismiss your Legion so it can charge on its own. And if you notice, when the meter is kind of like a gray bar, I guess, it'll recharge those parts quite a lot faster when you desummon, unless your Legion gets hit. Not only will that remove some of your meter, but will also remove that faster regen. So you need to be aware of your Legion's positioning to avoid potential danger and look out for how much meter is left to work with. This gets you to think if it's worth the risk to keep him going for that extra damage, or put him away so you can have a lot of meter to work with when it's really needed. Because if you get carried away and let the meter empty, then you have to deal with a delay before the recharge begins, and you still can't use them until it's fully filled. So there's some kind of meter management going on. Been holding off for a while, but yeah, let's finally talk about our Legions. So we get 5 throughout the game. We can cycle through them on the fly with the tap of a button, or holding Y will bring up this menu. Before we get into their specifics though, let's go over some of their universal mechanics. Well, immediately, they fix one of the major issues of Chaos Legion. So when you summon, notice how your weapons glow blue. That's because you actually gain a damage buff and will even attack faster as you fight alongside each other. So with these buffs, we have some sort of use and not just there to deal chip damage. Okay, we have a good amount of control over our Legions. If you hold left trigger, you can move them with the right thumbstick, which means you do lose control over your camera, but surprisingly it was never a bother. But alright, with this we can place them in certain areas, especially ones out of reach. And then we can pull ourselves towards them. Now to build off from that, we can send our Legion at an enemy and then use this to close the gap, quickly starting our next fight. We actually hurt anything along the way too. Something that's really cool is that the chain is a tangible object in game. So you can circle one or a few enemies to trap them. And remember, you can still move yourself while you control your Legion's movement at the same time. But yeah, just don't use this too much because enemies will only break out faster if you keep binding them over and over. And if you see an enemy start up a rushing charge attack, you can stretch out that chain and clothesline them, sending them flying back for a free punish. Now for one more thing, sync attacks. Every time you see that giant flash on your character, that's when you can go for a sync attack. Having a Legion jump in to do this even more powerful ender. If you played Bayonetta 3 or Transformers Devastation, this should look very familiar. But if you haven't, just know that a combo ender, Howl, Delay, Assault, and 360 move all lead to a sync attack. And I know the tutorial says it might flash, but this is not random. It's just up to you if you want to manually follow up. Yeah, this was way more frustrating to use than I would have imagined, and that's because these lacked impact. To go back to Transformers, you can instantly tell the difference between the two games on how they use this. Hopefully the gameplay can speak for itself, but for me personally, Devastation is leagues ahead than Astral Chain. Even Bayonetta 3, its versions of sync attacks are on that same level as Devastation for having that impact and immediate feedback. But here though, we get none of that. Instead, you'll get into an animation that makes you a sitting duck. It's pretty annoying and extremely unfun version of the mechanic. They did it perfectly in the past, so I don't know why they made it worse this time around. Now for the specifics of each Legion, starting with Sword, tosses out some quick multi-hits. Its main skill brings out Summon Swords to shred whatever's close. Now every Legion also has this alternate mode, and Sword has Blade mode. Feels less precise than Rising Revengeance, pretty finicky too, but it's cool to see it back. It's rarely used because of that, but you can use it to counter certain attacks by cutting those red energy signals. But not every enemy have these weak points, so just another reason why it's not used much. Arrow Legion. It's good for long range. Main skill is Slow Shot. It's this AoE cast that'll slow every enemy that gets hit by it for a brief moment. For the ult mode, you can aim to hit those far off problem enemies, or hit their weak spots. Arm Legion is an up-close brawler, can even throw objects around. Its main skill, Gravity Storm, is pretty busted. It'll pull in all nearby enemies of all sizes. Great to crowd control or set up follow-up skills since everyone's clumped together. And its alternate mode is wearing it like armor. It even has its own moveset, directional attacks and all. Beast Legion, really evasive, can't leave the ground though, so can't be sent over gaps or to those flying enemies. Main skill is Howl. This is also busted, because it's this AoE attack that stuns an entire crowd. Doesn't matter if it's a boss or a tiny grunt, they'll be interrupted right then and there. But what makes it broken is the fact that it has no diminishing returns. Remember how bind will be less and less of an effective option with repeated uses? Yeah, that's not the case here, so go ahead and mash these out constantly when you can. And its alternate mode has you ride it. You can hold the attack button and you'll drag your weapon against the floor, which is pretty cool. But this is also pretty broken, because it'll auto dodge every single attack. It does use up that limiter, but very little. You would think the balance here is to either have your dodge or speed to avoid attacks. The best comparison is Elden Ring. You want to be on horseback or on foot. Really depends on how you want your defensive game plan to be, right? But here there's no give and take. Just free escapes with no skill or thought on your end. But hey, it's not like the dodge in this game was good to begin with though. And lastly, Axe Legion. It's the tank of the bunch. Really slow but pretty damn strong. Main skill is Blue Shield, gives you 3 free hits to do whatever you want. And again, with how awful the defensive options are, yeah, this will be your new favorite skill. Then its alt mode brings up this bird to help block attacks and hazards. Can even do perfect guards. And that's pretty much it. You can even match the baton form with a specific legion to do an extra sync attack. You even have directional moves from 360 and back forward attacks, and you can equip 2 skills per legion. Majority of these are unique to them, like we saw, but there's 1 or 2 that's available to everyone. The more popular one is Hit Rush, and it lets you unchain your legion, instantly going off to attack on its own. Once it's over, they'll leave. But while they're doing that, you can swap to another legion and fully control them as usual. So we have 2 legions on the field just causing chaos. Now let's not get ahead of ourselves, because we need to let that unchained legion finish its attack first before we can send another one out to do its hit rush. So there's only a max of 2 legions out at a time, but still pretty hype. There's also auto bind, but it's easily interrupted during a startup, halfway through, or as it's happening. It can be stopped at any moment, so I just don't care to use it. There's also ability chips that we can put on our legions too. The usual stuff like stat boost, passive so you don't get slowed by goop or strong cooldowns, and a few more. And yeah, be sure to clean your legions too, because you do need to maintain them. Doing this will give him a speed boost, better sync attacks, and less stagger when hit. And yeah, I wouldn't blame you if it's boring to do because, well, it is. When it comes to enemies, well, I'm sure you know what I'm saying, but I don't think it really matters. But the bad defensive options, it's no use playing around these guys in smart ways. And our cooldowns are so insane, we don't even have to fight them in the slightest to begin with, even at the highest difficulties, which we'll look at in a bit. There's critical hits, hitting their heads with either arrows or attacking their back will do extra critical damage. When enemies are stunned, go up and attack them. It'll automatically change your attack to a somersault launcher. There's no jump in this game, but you can follow up with a sync attack. And when you're about to kill an enemy, you'll be given a chance to land a finisher. Only works on chimeras, so it can't be used on everything. But similar to Rising Revengeance, these glory kills restore your health. It actually fills the entire thing, as well as our legion's limiter gauge. So you know what that means? Meter management has been completely tossed out the window. All the spacing and movement needed to preserve your meter doesn't really matter at the end of the day. You'll toss out cooldowns that skip fights since they're all denial type of moves, and you can just deal massive damage from far back. And then you get a free glory kill for that, refilling all your meters so you can easily repeat the process with no worries. Bosses are okay. I do like how we fight each legion before we capture them, so we get to see firsthand how they attack before the power is ours. But with a mix of borderline useless defensive options that punish you for playing skillfully, and having weak attacks that don't pack any punch, this makes you want to avoid any situation where you need to be up close. And even if you wanted to go on the aggressive, our sync and cooldown attacks get snuffed out by the slightest touch, so why bother using them? So instead, let's just stand far away as possible, tossing out so many cooldowns like slow, bind, and grab to delay and avoid enemies at all costs. This works more than it should, mainly because those cooldowns do everything for you. And there's no counterplay from enemies either. So you're just free to do the most passive things possible and get away with it, even on the highest of difficulties. And that's Astral Chain. Well, seems like we're on 3. It reminded me a lot of Bad from other games. Similar to Dusk Diver, the game has you toss out your assist with massive hitboxes, just doing all the work. Same thing happens here, just need to shut them down before the fight even begins. Valkyrie Elysium had the same problem too. Let me toss out all my cooldowns before the fight can even begin. Now the reason why you don't want to fight yourself is because defensive options are so inconsistent and not rewarding to use, just like No More Heroes 3. So just cycle through everything and that's it. There's nothing else outside of that because the game is that simple. Now I don't have an issue with cooldowns. I can appreciate what they're going for, like Hi-Fi Rush for example, and that's because they have strengths and weaknesses, so you actually have to think when to use them. Scarlet Nexus, you also dump cooldowns, but the difference is they give you abilities to make the difference for yourself. While Astral Chain and Dusk Diver on the other hand, the assists do all the fighting and you just get to watch the fireworks go off. To really put this to the test, I did this for about half of the post-game challenge missions where we are pitted up against late-game enemies in all sorts of different groupings. Sometimes multiple bosses at once too. Even that wasn't enough to push me to rethink my approach. Still stuck to my same strat of looping my cooldowns to avoid any or all fighting myself. And this got me easy S+ ranks. Then I went on to play story on Platinum Ultimate, the hardest difficulty. I completed a third of the game, and yeah, nothing changed. It doesn't push you in any way or give you new challenges. The same strategy works just as well in any other difficulty, and from completing a lot of those post-game missions in File 12, I have seen how this works against everything. And the story doesn't really mix up its encounters as it is either way, so I'm sure Ultimate wouldn't be any different going forward. Just dump cooldowns to skip all interaction and get free S ranks for it. That's just how the game is played. But before we get to this point, I'll be honest with you, this is one of the slowest burns I've played in a while. Probably because it's a 20 to 25 hour game that doesn't really use its time wisely. So yeah, you can imagine the time it takes to get your next Legion is pretty spaced out. Really reminded me of Wonderful 101 in that way because that game also takes its time to give you every morph form. But at least 101 is very arcadey, where we get to go from one fight or set piece or any side bit in quick succession. So we get that variety of scenarios where we get to rethink on how we use all our different forms, and then we quickly move on to the next thing. Being a linear game helps with that, so we can keep things moving forward. But Astral Chain goes for a more semi-open world approach, just a lot larger areas in general. Because of that, it can be a little iffy on how things are spaced out. But remember, Mad World did this too, and it was pretty cool how they went about it. There's multiple spots for you to build combos that's unique to that level, hidden items to find like 1-ups or weapons through exploring, extra challenges to complete for higher score, mini bosses that'll chase you down, so it's up to you if it's worth fighting them, or try your best to run away as this sort of stage hazard, and a whole lot more. Astral Chain though, they don't really use this extra room to create those interesting moments that heavily involve our legions. You think they would, especially since that's the main draw of the game, but instead these open areas are just here to give out little busy work. You can do little side cases like distract someone's cat to pick it up, gather clues by talking to people, follow trails, balance ice cream with gyro controls, remove boxes, clean up litter, remove red matter, run around the HQ talking to your crew, and yeah. I like my variety, but there's definitely a wrong and right way to do things, and this isn't the strongest example out there. Now there are hidden astral plane portals that have hidden bosses for us to repeat the same cooldown dump, but these are few and far between. Yeah, they put the main draw of the game on the back burner to give you all sorts of little activities that'll get you immersed into the world and feel like a good cop more than anything else. So not only does the early game feel pretty bad because none of your options have impact or just get outright denied, but once you get 1 or 2 upgrades for each legion, the game becomes a Muso power fantasy, just doing flashy over-the-top moves to shut down any sort of encounter with ease. The combat just doesn't have that middle ground to it where enemies respect your options and you theirs. So I'll be nice and place it here for now, but I can see myself moving it a bit lower later on. If you want an enjoyable cooldown based action game, there's Hi-Fi Rush of course, FF16 a solid 2, your attacks will be denied, and your defensive options actually work. Scarlet Nexus isn't half bad. It's what Dusk Diver should have been. If you want to summon an action game that's made by Platinum, play Bayonetta 3. Again, your defensive options work as you'd expect, and it's balanced better than every summoner game we've looked at, because there are certain enemies that can't be attacked so easily by you, so you use your demon instead, but some enemies can't be fought with demons, so you have to step in. There's also the meter management to worry about, because if they're out for too long, or if they get hit too many times, then it'll have them get enraged. And I don't think you want this kaiju-sized being chasing you down along with the other enemies in the room. So yeah, you can't over-rely on these big body allies to handle all your fights, because you'll be punished for that, since there's actual risk-reward, checks and balances to it all. Definitely a more well-rounded version of the concept. Then go play Bayonetta Origins, because it's extremely underrated. But yeah, Astral Chain puts a noticeable emphasis on world building and the story this time around, instead of the arcadey focused gameplay we expect from Platinum. Because of that, it takes a long time to get things started, and when it finally does, there's not much to see.